In this lesson, I am going to introduce quadratic inequalities to you. Remember that inequalities compare values. Where we solved inequalities before, we were talking about like 6x minus 3 is greater than 0. We're going to be doing the same thing, but rather than having linear equations, we're going to be working with quadratic equations or quadratic inequalities. So our goal is to understand and visualize quadratic inequalities. Okay. So what I have here is there's a lot on the screen. A, B, and C have the same quadratic, x squared minus 2x minus 3, but then our inequality is talking about something a little bit different or looking for something a little bit different each time. On the right-hand side, I have the graph of x squared minus 2x minus 3, okay? So this first part A, is looking for greater than 0. Greater than 0 means positive values or where y is positive, okay? So values above the x-axis. So we're looking here and here. Okay, so our answer would be, if we're asked to write our answer in interval notation, this starts all the way at negative infinity, -1, and -1 gets a parenthesis because it can't equal 0. At this point right here and right here, this quadratic equals 0. It comes from x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 0. If you factor and solve, you'll see that x is -1 and 3, okay? And then we have another spot, so we join two sets with a union, 3 to infinity. Okay, so we'll learn how to solve these, but for now my goal is to just visualize them and understand what they're talking about. For part B, we're talking about where our quadratic is less than 0, which means where it's negative or below the x-axis. So this is talking about right here. Okay, so the leftmost endpoint is -1, and again, it's not equal to 0, so it gets a parenthesis, and then it goes to 3. Okay, I'm going to erase the markings now and do the last one. So x squared minus 2x minus 3 is greater than or equal to 0. So greater than 0, again, would be these portions here, because they correspond to positive y values or y values that are greater than 0. Okay, and I am putting a closed dot here because we can include where this equals 0, which means we can include the endpoints -1 and 3. So we have negative infinity, which is always a parenthesis, to -1, bracket 3 to infinity. Okay, so that's, we'll be solving these. We aren't necessarily going to graph all of them. I just wanted to show you where they come from and what these are looking for, and also talk about some possible options. So you could have a quadratic equation that's contained entirely above 0, but never below. So for instance, if this were to ask where our quadratic equation is greater than 0, it would be everywhere. Or if it were to ask where is it less than 0, it would be nowhere or no solution. You can also have a quadratic that's contained entirely below the x-axis, which means it's less than 0, never above 0, never even 0 in this case. So if you had a quadratic inequality that was doing something like this and you were asked, okay, where is it above 0? Your answer would be no solution. Or where is it below 0? All real numbers, or negative infinity to infinity. Okay, and then we could have the options, the kind of that we just saw, where we have a quadratic equation. Okay, and wherever it crosses the x-axis, notice, or the zeros or the solutions of the quadratic equation are where this graph is changing between being above the x-axis and below the x-axis, or having positive values and having negative values. So one of the strategies we'll talk about when we're solving is we'll need to find these zeros so that we can determine what our graph is doing. Okay, or you could have something like this. Okay. So those are just some options to visualize to maybe help us understand as we go through the problems. Thank you for watching. In the next lesson, we will go about solving quadratic inequalities.